All right, you guys, welcome back to another episode of Car Talk. I'm your host, Big Mike, here with,
Ryan Bossery from Rywire.
and you guys know what it is everything in the car community, the culture, the industry. That's what we talk about. This particular episode, we are going to discuss what separates good from great. What makes a build okay, good, and what makes it great and even timeless. All right?
Okay.
So, we this kind of really sort of ties into our last couple episodes about questions that we've been answering because that's really in one way, shape, or form a question that we get all the time. And we wanted to dedicate an episode specifically to this because personally, Ryan, I feel like as many people get it, there's so many more people that I feel like there's a very simple disconnect, and I'm not 100% sure why. You guys, let us know what you think about it. But I feel like there is a big disconnect because there are many people who believe um, that theirs is great, and it's not though. That's a little harsh, but it's not.
Yeah, but I mean, you should always build what you want to build, and
Yes.
don't let what we're saying,
Or
uh,
the internet, or magazines,
right,
or
make you
anything.
do something different.
Sure, sure.
But this is purely asking or answering the question of what makes
A
it
build go from
good
good to
to
great.
great.
Yeah, and like Ryan brings up a very good point, you guys. In the end, of course, it's about what you like. Okay, but the same on the same note, there are the same people who say I do what I want, and then they're upset when they don't get acknowledgement, when their car isn't winning at a car show, or when they aren't acknowledged or maybe reposted on these various social media channels. And so you can't have it both ways. If it's really just about what you like, then it shouldn't matter. But, I travel a lot. Maybe not so much, obviously, in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
but I do. And you've done your fair share, but I mean, I do a lot, of
Mm-hmm.
car shows, you guys.
Yeah.
I've gotten to this point where I host and judge at a ton of different shows that have all types of cars. And that is a thing that no matter where, Philly, Chicago, Miami, it doesn't matter, right? There's always at least one or two people that come up to us, me, one of the judges, all of us after a show, and they're just like, why didn't I win? And they're not usually asking very nicely. They're offended,
Right.
they're upset. Some people ask constructively, can you please, I'm sorry to, I know everyone's, finished up, the show's ending. Can you come over and just kind of, give me some advice? And even that I have to toe the line because that could be sort of like,
Yeah,
extra help.
it could go down a path
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
you're not really trying to get into right then,
Yeah,
or
exactly.
it could be anything
It
at
could
that
be
point.
anything. So Ryan hits the nail on the head. It is, of course, what you like, what you've envisioned, but it can't be that and then also necessarily be what everyone else thinks is great. So if you just think that far out of the box in the sense of crazy color combinations or wild fitment, then you're going to have to be okay with the fact that that might just work for that type of person,
Mm-hmm.
right? You can't just say, well, what about this? When that's a little bit more commonplace, or if you're using an off-brand set of wheels, not even necessarily replicas, but just some random ass company because they were, I don't know, whatever, cheaper. But then of course if you build something crazy and then you top that whole build off with a set of replicas, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, you have kind of toned down the entirety of what you built.
Yeah.
The paint might be amazing. No one's gonna give a shit if they're looking at it and it's on some kind of a little bit more commonplace considered shitty wheels. You're gonna have to just take that on the chin, right? Do you agree with
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah, for
Okay,
sure.
so same thing. Like if you have shitty paint, but you have a really dope engine bay setup, people are gonna have a hard time really like wanting to come over and kind of glance at it for a very long period of time if your car is purple and the engine bay is yellow. And that's coming from a Southern California Lakers fan. I don't want to see a purple car with a yellow engine bay, or vice versa. Now if someone has that exact combination, it's not personal. I'm just saying, if you want to be that bright, that loud, that low, that stanced, you're gonna have to just be okay with that not being for everyone.
Sure.
Okay, but all right. So let's kind of break into Ryan. Let's go with some examples. What we'll do is we'll go. Let's
Early.
go early in the industry, and that's relative, of course. 20 years to us. There's other guys who are doing it for 10 years, 15 years, longer than that. So we'll just kind of throw anything like pre 2000 ish, pre. We'll throw that into the old era, older. So, what do you think, Ryan? What builds have stood out to you?
Well, I was a CRX guy early on, and I really wasn't even like a Honda guy per se, but
CRX
I
guy.
was
Yeah, we've talked
specifically
about that.
CRXs
Mm-hmm.
for the first probably 4 or 5 years of me really getting into cars.
Yeah.
Before I really like opened my mind up to more stuff. But there was one individual, rest in peace, Randy Gagan.
Sure.
His CRX was very inspirational for me. Um, I think that Randy's build, and it truly was a build.
Yes.
It was a full teardown car.
Yeah.
Specifically his gray CRX.
Yes.
Um, it had the engine bay addressed, and I mean for the time, people didn't even really do engine bays, and he was, you know, using AN fittings to run his brake lines. He was
Color coordinating.
yeah, there was a lot of thought put into that
Yes.
car.
Yes.
The exterior looked good, simple, just JDM style. Nice Japanese wheels, Japanese front end and lights, and the whole SIR
Yes.
kind of conversion exterior, which you can't go wrong with.
No.
And
cannot.
it's still timeless to this day.
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, my gray CRX, when before I did it green and whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that gray car was. I mean, I'm not saying that I was like trying to build that, but I liked his color so much that I wanted to
It was
do
the
something.
inspiration behind your gray one.
Yeah, and it was the simple JDM theme, just parts from Japan, OE, put them on the exterior, and it's kind of good.
Yes.
And I mean, even when I was building that, that's the look I was going for. And then even today, if I was going to build a CRX, if I was doing it gray, it would look pretty much the same as
Yes.
the one I did before and Randy's car. Anyway, his interior was really clean and
Yes.
nice. It was done well. His engine bay was probably the biggest outstanding part. And I mean, if it was just the exterior and the interior, it may have been kind of forgotten about. You know?
Yes.
But
Okay.
the fact that he was so early on doing all these like AN lines, and he was doing kind of like tucking wires and making his engine bay just like look like something that nobody had ever really seen too much before,
Yes.
that would be the car for me, the early on one.
I think that is a very good example. For those of you that may not know what that is, take the time to look it up after the episode. Randy Gagan, CRX, you'll find it pretty quickly.
Should be able to.
But that kind of touches on something, you guys. I mean, that's a pretty decent amount of time ago. I was going back in my mind even a little bit further.
Sure.
So, I think that is a very prime example. Okay, I mean, it was just a beautiful CRX that if that pulled up to any place today, people would just be like, that is very, very clean. But that, to me, that sort of starts to tie into kind of a little bit of a newer part of the old era. And what I'm saying is
Yeah.
like,
Sure.
for me, the cars that stood out, which you want to talk about outlandish, but were also fast. You have like the Bergenholtz Integra. Okay, so shout out to Ron and Ed, but I was a kid and I was looking at the race scene and I was like, this Integra is just wild, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I used to go to the shows back in the day, so like white vinyl interior and cotton puff in the wheel wells, and like crazy audio systems.
Yeah.
So that, like, if you pulled up in one of those today, people would think of it nostalgic, but they're not going to think that it's like this most timeless thing ever. But yet the Bergenholtz Integra with polish this and chrome that, and then of course like the Whitfield CRX. Speaking of CRXs, I mean,
Yeah,
this
the
is
Birkenholz CRX, the Whitfield CRX.
yeah. You've got these outlandish paint jobs, crazy engine bays, especially for the time where people weren't chroming everything.
Yeah, the Whitfield CRX is just like
It was wild.
Wild. It was
Yeah.
crazy.
And that's what I'm saying.
Especially for the time.
But if that pulled up today, I mean, maybe people wouldn't like the multicolor paint job. But if it was one color and it just rolled up and popped the hood, people would be like, "What?"
Yeah.
So that's kind of a thing that you jump 20 years and it can still do its thing. Randy CRX, way, way different, of course, than the CRXs we just mentioned. But yet, there you go. One's crazy and bright, and one isn't. And yet, they're both being talked about in the context of being timeless,
Mm-hmm.
being memorable, being timeless, being great.
Yeah, and they don't, and they share a lot of the same similarities, but then there's a lot of
A lot
differences.
of differences. So you guys, I feel like those are really good examples of. I mean, Kenny Trans Supra. I don't know. You got Adam Sorrow Atari's like tubbed RX-7, and then he had
Yeah.
the NSX. I mean, like when you have those cars, maybe if you were to take off the fiberglass parts, they're not that clean underneath. But you're talking about like carving out a memory, the
Mm-hmm.
colorways, the trailers, the presentation, and then of course they raced them. But these cars are just stamped in everyone of a certain age in mind forever, and that's why we can have this conversation about them. But the guy with the crazy fitment, with some spikes and maybe something dangling from the rear tow hook, no one's gonna talk about that. And you guys have to be okay with that. If you're one of the people, you have listen to what we're saying. We're not saying that you should change your style. If that's what you like, then like that, but don't be upset if other people don't like it. Okay? So good, there's bad, good, and then great. So we're talking about the ones that are great and they've just stood the test of time. What other kind of cars from a long time ago kind of stand out to you as being great builds?
So we're talking like 2000 era
Yeah,
now, or you want to
just
go a little
no,
bit?
like yeah, just like just from back in the day, whatever that may mean to you.
A lot of the car. Well, there's like groups of guys that would do um, cars maybe a little bit similarly.
Yeah, yeah.
I think like those AM7 cars, a lot of those stood out because they were on the cusp of like, there were guys that would race them, but then there's also like that's when the show scene like turned into like kind of street cars, and
Okay.
not like you have to have a show car where it's
Yeah,
like
it was
this
like very
trailer.
straight JDM
Yeah, it's
custom.
a street JDM customized car that is now qualified as a show car, but in reality it's like a street car,
Yes.
right? But then they're super clean, so then they're like, well, what do we do with these? In my mind, it's a show car, right?
Yeah.
That's where it kind of turned into that in my experience for what my thought is.
Yeah.
And I think that those AM7 guys just like, hitting the magazine covers in a pack of all these properly done Japanese themed, but then they have their own like weird crazy vibe, where
Yeah.
ones would be a really loud color,
Yeah.
another one would have really crazy interior.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like some
Yeah.
of these like AM7 kind of cars, I think that's kind of if we're moving along in the timeline,
Yeah.
my mind jumps to like maybe not one specific car, but kind of AM7 as a whole.
I see. I see.
So, but I mean, like, the EKs and the cars were great.
If we're kind of going that route, for you guys that are watching, once again, if you take the time to do a little bit of research, you'll see the cars that we're talking about. You can just type in AM7 Honda, and I'm sure instantly you'll be able to get some links
Yeah.
and images. But if we're talking about that, so these cars that we're talking about, they were pretty all out. So interiors were done, engine bays were done, color changes, aero wheels. Now, even before them, or before that style, I should say,
Hmm.
started to become prevalent, for cars that were done, because it doesn't always have to be elaborate, like a full teardown. There were many people who were not doing all out, full ground up restorations
Sure.
or resto modifications, but their cars are timeless. Like, let's take, for example, John Wong's EF. JDM,
Yeah.
JDM John, right? JDM Wong, well, JDM John Tanji, I actually was going to bring
That
him
was
up right
another good one
afterwards.
too. Yeah.
But okay, so Johnny Wong, his EF to this day,
Hmm.
you just can't go wrong with that. You just can't
Right.
ever get old. It doesn't get outdated.
Yeah. You get a clean chassis.
Yes.
and you have all the groundwork there. Let's say you're
Yes.
like, okay, well, I'm going to do a EF. I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to make sure I have black interior
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that, the body's relatively straight,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't have to change the color really.
Mm-hmm.
And then you do like what Wong did, and it's like, all right, you change the seats, you change the steering wheel, you change all these component, like
Yeah, it's in the
some rare
style of the
rare
rare
parts.
JDM stuff.
And then you maybe like, he had the first ever, if you want to call it, the Rocket
Yeah,
Bunny
the front bumper.
front bumper,
Yeah.
and that really changed the look. But then he could easily go back to his original kind of
Yes.
style.
Yes.
Had some parts. I'm sure a lot of stuff has been repainted and stuff,
Yes.
but it probably didn't really need to because the car was already so clean,
Right.
right?
But that's a testament to him finding it and him keeping it that way.
Keeping it, making sure it stays that
Right.
way. Only using choice parts, stuff that you can revert back to.
Yep.
You know.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a really good example.
And with these era specific period correct wheels, you can switch them out,
Yeah.
and it just doesn't get old. It can pulled up back then, and people were like, what? Pulls up now, people are like, they just love it, right? So those are examples of cars. They were not every piece of suspension taken off and tumbled and powder coated, chromed, or
Yeah, they didn't need that.
no, it just that style. So that's an example of how you don't need to do, if you're feeling like, oh well, all the cars mentioned so far were torn apart. I don't have the wherewithal, the money, or the resources to do that. It's not even necessarily about that. It's just about the cleanliness. But what one thing that we're talking about here is the word hasn't been used yet, but it's invariably there, is execution. And what we're talking about, like let's say there's a lot of cars along the same parking spaces at a meet or at a show. And let's say all of them have had paint jobs. All of them have suspension, aftermarket suspension, and all of them have wheels. Why is one or two nicer or better than the ones next to them? They all have the same thing on paper. It's because when you or the body shop is putting the car back together, let's say the paint jobs are equal quality. If one front bumper is like offset slightly and one fender isn't fit perfectly, even if you couldn't put your finger on it, it starts to take away. If there's
Yeah.
gappage, if there's a clip missing from somewhere, and this is where you get that area of execution and details, right? If one, back in the day before people started doing every nut and bolt, people, the ones who wanted to ball out, bought all those Mugen license plate bolts,
Yeah.
right? For
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
and they put them all in their engine bay. I mean, that was pretty wild, right? And then of course, there were other options that started to come into existence. And then the first time I got inspired by when I saw somebody do ARP 12 point.
Yeah, I
So that's what I
remember
did
that,
on my green Prelude.
Yeah, and then you were like reaching out to ARP, like, "Hey, can you make this
Can
in
you?
metric?"
Yes, and they were
so,
just like, sure, but it was like some astronomical number.
So that's a perfect example of making a build stand out, right? So it's like you saw somebody use an ARP 12-point bolt,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's an easy one to get. Let's say it's a
M6 by 1.0.
M6 by 1.0, M8 by 125,
Yep,
right?
easy to get.
And they're like nuts. They're not bolts, just a nut, right? Okay, cool. That's easy to get. It does a lot for the build, right? But if you have to reach out to the company
Mm-hmm.
and be like, can you make this? What's the minimum quantities?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You're doing your homework to figure out what you want. Then you're figuring out the source of where those parts come from, and then you realize that they don't exist and they need to be made. And then you have to make that decision: do I want this bad enough?
Mm-hmm.
And let's say that you did go down that
Mm-hmm.
that route, and you decided to have them make you whatever. They will make you 10, minimum, but there's this much money per bolt or whatever. Let's just say, and you're like, yeah, well, I'll use them, and then I'll use them for another car, or maybe a friend needs them or whatever. You're going above and beyond, and you're making things happen that literally the guy next to you does not think about, nor do they have. And then that's what is single-handedly
Starts to separate.
yeah, and you start doing that more and more and more, and
Yes.
then now you're leading this groundwork. Because I don't know for a fact, but I bet you if you call ARP now, they probably make a lot of metric stuff.
Oh, they do. They do. I think the only thing they don't make would be some of the weird lengths.
Sure.
The lengths for
But-
like subframe transmission.
Right.
But other than that, almost everything.
But that's what I'm getting at. Or like these guys that kind of started like that hardware craze, like Randy, where
Yep.
they found like this colored washer or whatever,
Yep.
and they start placing them. Just kind of like what you're saying about the Mugen bolts
License
and hardware.
plate bolts.
It's like
Or the Accord Chrome nuts.
yeah, like Fred,
Like
right?
yep,
So
the
this
ATS
is a good
guys in Fred,
example.
yeah.
So Fred, he worked at Honda for a while. Fred
Yes.
Chapman, and he was noticing that I think it was like on the K24 Accords or something like that, or maybe it was pre. I don't remember.
No, it
Anyway,
was pre.
it was before K series, so
Yeah.
it's before like 2002 or something.
I really believe so.
Okay, so whatever the case may be, you have these factory Honda, very smooth, almost chromed looking heart like M6 1.0, maybe 16 to
Hex bolts.
20, yeah, to 20 millimeters long.
Yep.
So this is a great universal kind of size.
Yes.
So what he was doing, well, I don't know what he was doing, but he was able to source a lot of these,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
He got all these nice looking bolts and he'd put them on all the ATS guys' car, just change them out, put it
Whichever
on,
ones they could fit,
and
yeah, and it just changed it up.
it was very impactful,
Oh yeah, oh
and
yeah,
it looked great, and it was still a factory Honda Bolt.
yes,
Everything was
yes,
but it was just a certain one that Honda decided to like just chrome the shit out of it or polish it
yeah,
up and make
yeah,
it look amazing. So he was putting them on all their cars, and it's like, man, you look at the engine bay, you're like, I can't put my finger on it, but
yeah.
it looks great. And then it's like, oh, it's because this hardware and this and that, and it's all these little details
Little details.
cleaning up something, and all of a sudden it's super impactful. So that person, for example, decided that he was going to get that bolt.
Yes.
And then you call ARP, and you're
Yes.
able to get a few more pieces.
Yes, yes.
And that's how the builds turn amazing.
Right.
And I
That's
think
right.
like kind of to lead into it, I think going down the stream a little bit, you got like the guys like ATS.
Mhm.
And I think that their history and the role that they play is actually one of the most impactful, whether people see it or not.
Okay.
I think that those guys, the way that they put together cars, and thank goodness I was able to be with them, like, help them work on their cars. And, I was able to see the thought process that was put into each one of those cars,
Yes.
and then be involved with some of their electronics and some of the just design in general.
Yes.
I think that was an era that I really think that was the most impactful, and I could literally say that all the ATS cars are my favorite of that era.
Of that era.
Those all go down in history in my mind.
Yeah.
Every one of those builds is just like so incredibly well done. Like from ATS On's car
Yep.
to Chris's car to Fred's
Dude,
car,
Fred and Ferd and
and
Phil's.
and then you go a little bit newer,
Newer,
and then
yeah.
you got Phil's car. I mean, Phil's car it's probably my favorite built Integra, aside from the one that I did,
Yeah.
because obviously I'm a little bit biased. But that's probably my favorite Integra outside of my orange one that I've ever.
Ever.
That's the best one I've ever seen. And I hate to say the whole, like, you know how you always say like, oh, it's an Integra. I'd say that's one of the best builds I've ever seen.
I see. I see.
But for an Integra, I'd say it's top notch, 100%.
Yeah, okay, so once again, you guys, at a bare minimum on my my personal Instagram, I'm going to tag these people in the in the caption, so you can at least jump to their Instagrams and see what we're talking about. But there you go. We've gone from, all out, the Bergenholtz, Whitfield cars, like full blown. And then it kind of evolved into way more subtle.
Sure.
And then kind of evolved back, right?
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting thing, because you went from all out chrome, crazy paint, crazy engine based turbos, and then you go into all motor, earth tones, gunmetal grays, very subdued builds, right? All black AN lines instead of blue and red, right? And everything gets toned down. But then the era of bringing in the Japanese front ends and different colored side markers and different bezels and just little things like that help to create like a style that if somebody doesn't know, it looks relatively stock,
relatively stock.
right? But there's a lot of effort to make it look stock.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
then
that
some of the ATS cars were like body kitted and stuff like
sure,
that, and that's
sure.
very stand. You can't miss that driving down the road that it's highly modified.
Right,
But then
right.
there'll be another one like Phil's car, which is
It's red,
it's red with black wheels,
but
and you could
yes.
totally miss it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's I think the best
Oh
one
no, it's
ever done.
fantastic.
So it's like
And then I mean the Ferd's is just brighter.
yeah,
I mean different color,
different
but
front end.
it's gonna have like its own kind of appeal.
But
But
they were all like none of them missed the head. Like they were
no, they
all
were on point. They
all of
are on
them
point.
were so
Oh
perfect.
yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. So you guys, we're giving you examples, but we're also touching on really what is it? Is it this detail? Whether it be the first person to realize that all of these particular bolts and nuts are the same size, and oh well, this Honda Accord one is a hex chrome polish, and they switch them out,
Let's use
or
them.
or
Yeah.
ARP 12s and or someone saying, I don't need to, but I just want to like take off instead of just taking off my front suspension, I'm gonna drop the subframe and I'm gonna powder coat it.
Right.
Right? People started doing that much more commonly, and then when people started doing tucked engine bays and ITBs or whatever, you can fully see the subframe. So people started addressing that. I know people that have welded up the holes that they don't use anymore for all of the different brackets and all the stuff, and they smooth out the subframe. Do you need to do that? No, but what I'm saying is that there are the people who look and keep looking and find a way to do what they think would make it look cleaner, more streamlined. And that's the evolution. Some people go too far and do maybe a flat firewall. That's not going to be for everybody, right?
Yeah.
But why are we able to mention these cars? It's not because we've mentioned cars that were very simple all the way to full-blown ground up builds. And yet here we are mentioning them in the timeless category. It is because of the patience and the execution and the details. It's not because of the color that they picked. It wasn't because of any of that. I mean, it was because of details, and it was because of picking a classy style and running with that.
Yeah.
You know?
I think like being ahead of the curve
Yeah.
is a really big one. So like that hardware bolt, like that was ahead of the curve.
Sure.
Doing a tucked engine bay, using AN fittings for the first time, and like designing.
Yeah, the people who started taking fittings and sensors and moving them to the bottom of intake manifolds.
Sure.
That's
just,
like a dramatic change, and people can't really figure out why. Because the first couple of people I saw do that, they didn't try to like chrome it. They would like satin powder it or whatever, and you just didn't even really catch it.
yeah.
And you're like, "Oh, wait a minute. Like I don't see this and this." But it was
Yeah, like,
wired still.
early on when people were like, "Oh, well, this car doesn't even run," kind of
Yes,
that kind of whole
yes.
feeling where somebody could look at an engine bay that knows about cars and go like, "There's no way that this would work," but then it's just because the builder could visualize the end result.
Yes.
I think that's the hardest part for somebody that hasn't built a lot of cars is to be able to visualize the end result of what you want that, let's say an engine bay, for example,
Yes.
what you want it to look like, and then what you have to do to get it to look like that once all the criteria are in place, all
Yes.
the sensors, all the wiring, all the charge pipes, all the whatever you're using,
Mm-hmm.
and have it look the way that you kind of envision it.
Yes.
It's hard to forecast that stuff, and those people that do that well are going to set the standard and set the bar for everybody else.
And that's the people we're mentioning, and so many more. I mean, if your name wasn't mentioned, it's not because I could think of 50 cars to talk about, but we're just trying to use very simple examples.
So what like in that era stood out to you?
Which era?
Let's call it the ATS era.
Okay, so that's why I brought up the Accord bolt, and I was thinking of Fred
Yeah,
and all them.
you were thinking
Yeah, I was
about Fred
it
as
was the
well.
same thing. Obviously we're from California, SoCal and NorCal. Ryan's known those guys forever from the Bay. And they've become all of my homies too. And I've seen, the various builds that he just mentioned and other ones. Of course, in that sense, because I'm here, but they would be remembered or currently in my mind because of how good they are. It's really that simple.
Yeah.
But the person who did it Integra, from the ground up before anyone else that I could really think of. I mentioned John Tanji earlier, but
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't necessarily outright full blown ground up,
Sure.
dude. It was Jay from One,
Okay.
right? That Integra was the first Integra I remember that was, I mean, full color change. People were doing color changes, guys, but not every people were not into pulling dashes and carpets back in the day. So when you saw a color change, nobody really ever wanted to bring
Yeah.
out a car with a gutted out interior, like literally no carpet. So I know many beautifully done cars from back in the day, but if you pulled the carpet, it's the old color because no one was really doing that. But one of the first cars that comes to my mind that it was like, the entire car was when Jay did that Integra.
Mm-hmm.
And so that one sticks out to me. I think he just restored it for the present day owner.
Oh,
I think
okay.
he actually just
Yeah.
restored it,
Yeah.
did some maintenance work and did some restoration work. But that Integra was the one that stands out to me as being touched on every corner.
Yeah.
That one stood
Full,
out.
full, like
That's what I
fully
remember.
addressed
So
everything.
that era too, it's kind of all getting grouped in the same thing, but one was like 2001, one was 2006, but which is 5 years is a lot of years, but we're now in 2021, it's kind of all getting grouped together. But like the 90s was just filled with craziness. The late 90s, all the shows and stuff, mid to late 90s, there were so many cool cars. But yeah, I mean, there's I could think of Skylines and Sylvias, and there's Hachis and all kinds of dope cars. We're just using a little bit more known examples. But like I've been on the East Coast a lot. There's some fantastic Truenos, fantastic EFs. New York and Chicago has crazy car scenes. They just have a shorter period of the year that they can really experience them,
Yeah.
especially Chicago.
Yeah.
Chicago's got less than 3 months out of the year, and other than that, it's just brutal.
That would really deter me from even wanting to build any cars.
Yeah, dude, but they have amazing cars and the variety. New York's car scene is crazy because they can bring in Japanese real
Imports.
Japanese
Yeah.
cars way differently than we can.
Yeah.
If a car comes into the Jersey port or Florida,
Yeah.
that's a
Florida.
whole different thing than if it comes into Long Beach. If it comes
Flor-
into Long Beach, you're fucked, dude.
Florida's the wild, wild west for Japanese imported
Oh yeah,
cars.
man. I mean, there you go, you guys. So what I think we don't want to get lost in the midst of all of these cars is we don't want you guys to think that it needs to be these full blown pull all the glass, grind out all the sound deadening, and it has to be acid dipped and powder coated and tumbled and anodized and ceramic coated. No, it doesn't have to be. There are so many cars, all of, like, Charlie World, all of Charles's cars back in the day,
Hmm.
timeless.
Yeah, his
So
EF was
his
a
white
huge,
EF,
huge one for me.
dude, gorgeous. And that's just an example. These were not full blown from the ground up hot rod style builds like the
No,
way I did my Prelude.
his was like
his
a
Integra.
we can call it a Johnny Wong build,
Yeah, it's just
where
that style.
it's not a
Color,
rotisserie build,
Yeah.
but it's still on that
just
same
beautiful part choices,
Mhm.
color combination, rare wheels.
like rare parts
Perfect.
that you literally would have to just be spending time in Japan or have connects to even like know that some of these parts existed,
Yes.
especially in that time, in
Yes.
that era.
Yeah.
You're talking like 2003 or something like that, and you're sourcing these components, these parts, these Japanese parts that most people didn't even know even existed.
Yeah.
It would have been rare in Japan to find, and then
Sure.
you're able to find them, locate them, and bring them in and put them on your car.
Yeah. So that's kind of what we're trying to touch on here is that whether you're into race or show or Japanese or custom or outlandish and wild and low, if you're people who are tubbing cars now just so they can ride static, right? I mean, there are people like that who you got the guys who just fuck their fenders and their quarter panels up, just putting shit that's not even supposed to be on the car. But then you have some guys who are like, I'm going to have metal flares made. I'm going to have the body extended. I'm going to tub the car just so I can fit these wide wheels and achieve this depth of lip in the rear or the front. They're those people who are going to go the extra step. I mean, we haven't even touched on VIP builds. You got VIP cars that do it wrong, and then ones that do it right.
Yeah,
And some of their fitment is incredible.
the ones that do it right, people are like, how do they fit these wheels? Because the body work is so good that you
Yes.
don't even know
Yes.
that it's been modified.
Right.
Uh, that's VIP for me, at least. Like, I only like the VIP cars personally that look like that.
Mm-hmm.
That you're like, wow, that looks so clean and good. Like, there's no extra, but there actually is a lot of extra.
Yes.
That it's just so well covered up to make it look back to
Yeah,
stock.
or if they're doing like wild kits, maybe like walled or aim gain, it's so crazy that you don't even realize that the car is not just crazy in its grill shape, like aim gain has that crazy grill style, but the car's been widened like 3 inches in metal.
And you don't even like you
because
could
it
only
was
see
done.
it
Yes.
with a car next to
Yes.
it.
So for those of you present day, I mean, hopefully it can happen in this year. Auto Fashion's VIP Fest. It's a perfect example. San Diego, California. You will go and be able to walk through and see examples of what we just said. Crazy VIP builds, all the way to it just looks like a stock LS, but it's not. The way those wheels sit on there, it's not doing that on a
Yeah,
stock
you
body.
can't buy an LS and those wheels and just
Right.
like
Right.
camber it enough to make it look like that.
Right. Right.
They are literally like there's development into the behind the
Yes,
scenes to make
exactly,
it look like that. And there's
exactly.
a lot of trial and error,
Mm-hmm.
which I'm somebody who's spent a lot of time and money and probably fucked up a lot of stuff
Yes.
to get it to work,
Yes.
to get the formula down, to then
Right.
have the
So that
formula.
there you go. All this time, effort, trial and error, money, and all of this stuff just so that they can fit a certain offset, a certain width, a certain style, get a certain stance, a certain look when they drive, when they air down and they're sitting there parked. All of that is what makes them memorable versus the one who doesn't want to do that work, doesn't want to measure, doesn't want to have to potentially have a set of wheels made that they think they measured right, doesn't work. They have to undo them, whether they do it themselves or have a shop do it, to make a 1-2 millimeter difference. Change the offset here, maybe change the width, try a different tire that has a different sidewall. It's a lot of work, but that's why those are going to stand out. And the people who are lazy or just impatient, sometimes it's not laziness, sometimes it's just impatience. You just want yours to do what you think it should do, but someone else is willing to go a little bit farther, spend a little bit more time and money, and theirs are going to have that type of final effect that just makes it stand out.
How about current day stuff or even like future?
You know
What
what?
do you
Okay.
think?
That's exactly what we were going to go into next. There's so many to potentially bring up. So when we come back, we're going to address present day or a little bit more contemporary builds that have really, kind of stamped themselves in time as just really well done builds that can be referenced anytime. Right? So when we come back, we'll discuss that. See you guys in a moment. Think Bigger podcast. This is a branch of the Think Bigger project that is a brand and a movement and an ideology that was created to better the community and the culture around it. How you behave in your relationships, how you build a car, how you do anything comes from the way that you think. And if you can start there, then everything else will follow.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Ryan from Rywire here, and today I have something really, really cool to show you. What I want to show you guys is that nothing that I'm doing here is so far-fetched that you guys can't do it at home. We don't have any CNC, there's no 5-axis machine here. I'm literally just using my brain and hand tools to get a really, really cool project done. Even in the most basic conditions, a beautiful outcome can arise.
All right, guys, we are back. Thank you for being with us. So we're discussing what makes a build go from good to great, bad to good to great. Why are cars built in a very simple way, still memorable to people 5, 10, 20, 30 years later, just as much as cars that were built from the ground up. So we talked about, 25 years ago, Whitfield, Bergenholtz, Kenny Tran. I mean, and that's the race. We didn't even go show scene. And then went a little more contemporary. The era of bringing in Japanese subtleties, just side markers and bumper lights and bezels and steering wheels and things like that, and then all the way to taking that same style but adding customization, um, to build all out paint jobs instead of just jams and engine bays, but like underneath the carpet, underneath the dash. And so we're just talking about that kind of thing, and how it doesn't have to be ground up to be timeless,
Yeah.
but it's just really about the patience, the execution, and the details. That's really what it is.
Yeah.
So present day. Let's move to present day, Ryan. Present day meaning more, 5, 7 years.
Yeah.
As present. What do you think? What stands out to you as
I mean, I guess it's not like a specific car, but it's a specific style that's
okay?
kind of really jumped out, and that's like the guys doing the billet blocks, all-wheel drive.
Yes,
I mean, these cars are big money
and dumb fast.
and super detailed.
Yes. Okay, so that's a very good one.
So like, there's gonna be some. I mean, there's fast cars and they're heavy hitters, and as far as fast cars go. But if you want to talk about just timeless, there's those guys are setting the groundwork right now to really change it there again.
Well,
You know
they
what I mean?
already had to
Yeah.
give them their own class on the drag racing circuit,
Yeah.
because they're just ridiculous.
And there's so many of them. It's because
Yes.
the popularity
Yes.
has increased. There's companies that are dedicated to all-wheel drive Hondas specifically.
Yes.
And there's companies that are focusing just on the rear end parts,
Yes.
just on the transmission and the drive shaft axles and
Yes.
everything,
Yes.
every component along that drive shaft.
That's a really
So,
good one.
It's pretty cool to see the up and coming of that whole culture.
Yes.
And I think there's going to be a lot coming out of that group of guys, and a lot of them are honestly like they're East Coast.
Yeah, big shout out to the East Coast. I've been able to go out there a bunch of times. I've only seen a handful of the drag cars because when I'm out there, I'm hosting and judging at the shows. But I do keep my ear, and my eyes open. And I think that you bring up a really good one, because a lot of the East Coast guys are building.
Billet cars.
Not just to go fast,
The entire
but they
car's
are
billet.
building extremely good looking, detailed cars that are also monsters.
Yeah, it's wild.
And as more companies produce stuff, there's going to be a person, and then a bunch of people after that, who are going to have an entire all-wheel drive setup that's billet. There's already,
Well, yeah, there's already pretty much that,
but I mean, I'm talking about it is just straight up billet,
everything in the car,
bulletproof,
basically.
aesthetically
You're talking
gorgeous.
suspension components, you're talking all-wheel drive components,
Yes.
you're talking all the engine components.
Yes.
And yeah, it's definitely going to be that soon.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure when maybe it's already there, and I don't know, but
Yeah.
man, there's going to be something that's going to jump out, and that's going to be like the big wow.
Yes.
I can't wait to see
Within the last
where that
2 to 3
goes.
years, that evolution has turned crazy.
Yeah.
So, there are the people who just got like the CRV rear, used it, and then there are the people who are like, all right, let me clean it up, and then there are people who are like, let me rebuild it, and then we were talked about. There's
They're
the
turning
one.
into
There's
full
always
builds.
the one who wants to take it to the next level. They're like, all right, well, I don't just want to do that. I might as well pull everything apart underneath and restore it, or add sphericals, or add Heim joints, or add whatever. So there's always somebody. It isn't about doing the most work. It's necessarily not about that. It's about the end. You're building with the end in mind, right? So
And they're able to see the end from
yes.
the beginning and to build to that. And I think I really do think that's very important.
Yes. Yeah. So there you go. I mean, so big shout outs to everyone doing the all-wheel drive Hondas, both for speed and for just taking it to the next level. There's always the next level. And this is it, right?
And what else?
So I
you
mean,
got?
okay, so present day, I mean, a lot of Honda guys ended up getting into P cars, right? And I mean, and of course there are people who are into P cars and not being in the Hondas, but we're just sort of more acquainted to the people that evolved into that. And so here's an example of one that isn't about being built from the ground up and having billet everything, and I think it would be Jared. Jared. I'll put him in the caption in my Instagram, guys, so you can jump to his stuff. But Jared's Porsche, he's had more than one now, has more than one, but the one that everyone is presently aware of, it's got this gray tone, and he's put a lot of work into getting the fitment and the right concavity of a TE37 on there because they don't make them with the proper offset that equates to that look of the rear.
So that like suspension development with tires
Yeah,
and wheels,
and having to
he was
customize TEs.
and doing it on a car that he maybe like wasn't as familiar with
Right.
from the
Yeah, he definitely
beginning.
wasn't. He just learned, you
Yeah,
know?
and I mean, he really like if you think about you look at his black S2000, which
Yes.
should look that one up. It's all Mugen themed car.
Yes.
It was an amazing
Yeah,
build.
very nice.
Uh,
Very, very nice.
he basically built that car, and I feel like his end vision was that car in a 911 form. Just that's what I feel like that he was
I
trying to
think
do
that was
there.
definitely the catalyst.
And he like definitely achieved it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's crazy to see that world of the 911, let's call it the 911 air cooled
Sure.
guys, just gravitate towards his car.
Yes.
And like his first build, if you will,
Yeah, in a P
it was
car.
very impactful for that
Yeah,
community.
presently people are loving it.
Yeah.
But I mean, once again, what is it? It isn't that he took apart in a Porsche and put a crazy built motor and every piece of suspension is brand new. No, it's the color choice. It's the fitment, the effort that went into getting this right fitment, this right concavity, and this particular rear wing, this particular, height. Is there anything revolutionary about his stance? No. But when you combine all of these things, like the color, like the wheels, like the fitment,
I know that his shifter is like kind of first ever done with sleepers.
yeah,
So like that's another one of those you're building the industry kind of we're talking about. Oh, you get the bolt and you
yeah,
introduce
yeah,
that.
yeah,
This is like bringing with sleepers obviously doing all the development.
yeah.
But those are Honda guys from the get go too. So then they're like, well, there's no good like the shifters are always sloppy in these cars, and then so instead of just taking it as the shifters are always sloppy, let's create something that is an upgrade.
Right.
Let's do the development. Let's put it in Jared's car. He's
Yeah.
a friend. He'll give us a real,
Feedback.
feedback on if it's good, if it works, if it's better or not. And they were able to create something now that is an upgrade, and then that in itself separates him.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's all these little things that you have to understand that his car was never fully torn apart ever.
Ever. And that's what we're saying is like, don't let it be that it has to be the person who did a rotisserie ground up build. Because Jared's Porsche, like we're talking about, is an example of how certain choices, certain effort, and details make it stand out.
But then you have another build.
Dude, and then you have someone who's like, all right, well, I'm just going to go all out. And it's, I call him Buff Ryan Hegner. His green Porsche that was in the Eibach booth at SEMA 19.
Mm-hmm.
19, right?
I think so. Yeah, 19.
You guys, aside from, of course, something like the really cool color and certain customized pieces, you're talking about raw paint job, raw chassis, as much of it exposed
Yeah.
as possible.
I mean, Willie probably he was restoring it, right?
Yes.
Willie Works was
So
restoring
it's not
it.
just paint, it is full blown
Restoration.
restored. Yeah, it is a crazy restoration.
He was taking all the components and re-anodizing them and
re-zinking them and all of these types of things and restoring some rubber trim that cannot be found or it's just way too expensive, whatever. So Willie
spending hours on that stuff.
yeah,
I
on
mean,
little things that nobody sees. It's underneath the dash or it's underneath here or behind that. And so that's an example of a Porsche that went the type of route that I did on my Prelude, for example, that Ryan did on the Integra. You're talking about the entire car sitting there. It's just a piece of metal. Every bracket, every L bracket, every clip, every screw, every nut, every single part of the entire car was addressed and made better in some way, shape, or form. So that's a style. So you have two Porsches now. I mean, a Porsche's a Porsche, a 911, right? For people that don't know, there's all these different eras and generations, but you see a Porsche and it has a certain esteem to it.
Yeah.
And then you have one here that's, just stands out on its own, but it's never been torn apart to its entirety. And then you have another one that's just, dude, a year and a half of just
painstaking
a year and a
restoration.
half of just little things to
and
get
then
it.
another year of putting it all together.
Yep. So there we go. That's an example of a crazy platform to start with, a Porsche. And you can do it both ways, and both are very memorable, and it can be brought up later on, and people would be like, oh yeah, I remember that. Those are great. Or they could pull up, that green Porsche or Jared's gray one, you pull that up 20 years from now, and it'll just be like, oh damn.
Oh yeah,
You
for
know?
sure. There's not a
So
single thing that you'd be like, oh, that's so
yeah.
20.
Oh, I would have done different wheels. Everyone can say that. I would have done a different color, but we're talking about the effort and the detail. It's unquestionable. All right. And then the future, right? Which, the future, as we mentioned billet and we mentioned custom and handmade and this and that. If there's ever a build that brings in the future, and
I'm already like, know what you're gonna say.
it's not the future, it's being built right now, and it's oddly close. It's actually like really kind of close.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know about to what he believes is
Okay.
finished, but like as far as
What it looks
all
like.
the posts and all the
Yeah.
exposure of one piece, and then this piece,
Uh-huh.
but now it's like
Yeah.
physically visible, dude.
Mike's car, Magic
Yeah,
Mike.
3D Magic Mike. I hope that you see this because I've said we know each other in a way because of Discovery and blah blah
Yeah.
blah. So I've just acknowledged him, and we've communicated very minimally online. But if you guys do not know who 3D Magic Mike is, please take the time. I think it's 3D underscore Magic underscore Mike. He is building a Datsun truck that is presently, I cannot think of another import, and I mean import of any kind of import, that is able to
That
touch
would rival
this.
it.
No,
So
I can't think of a thing.
There's another guy online that you may or may not know of. He's building a race car,
Okay,
and he's doing it very similarly.
okay. What's
It's-
his name?
I don't honestly remember, but the guy does a lot of like motorsport wiring.
Okay,
It's like motorsport something or other
is his IG?
is his IG.
Okay.
I know that Motec posted one picture or reposted a picture of his, but Ryan Durr follows him a lot on Instagram, and same thing, man. Full scanning 3D.
Yeah.
Figuring out how things are going to fit based on computer renders.
Yes.
And then creating them, and then seeing an image of a 3D render of like a firewall and like,
Okay.
a fire suppression and a mil
So
spec
when
connector.
Ryan
and
remembers the name of this, you guys, we'll tag it.
It's like the race car version of Mike's car.
Okay.
It's wild. Shit's wild.
So we definitely, right now, for those of you watching, please, I beg you, if you don't want to look up anyone else we mentioned from the first segment to this
Look
segment,
up Mike's IG.
look up these two. 3D Magic Mike, you're talking about, I mean, he could have done this to any chassis on planet Earth, but he wanted to do the Datsun. You're talking about, we've used scanning, Ryan's EV S2000, the
Yeah,
white one.
I thought that was really cool that
Yeah,
we were able to.
so-
we literally handmade like maybe like 4 or 5 parts.
Okay, so my prelude,
that's
the
4 or
fenders,
5 parts.
Yeah,
Yeah,
the,
your
the fenders are
fenders were done.
handmade. Cody took the ideas and they're handmade. The front bumper, I used a June, Japanese, this rare Japanese half front bumper lip, integrated it all together, and I'm thinking this is crazy. Some scanning, some personalization, Kevlar, fiberglass. There's the metal guys that English wheel and make all this formed metal. And then you have the next fucking level, which is
the next guys
3D scanning the entire car. 3D printing metal. I mean, Steph Papadakis and them are 3D printing Inconel
Yeah.
turbo manifolds.
Yeah.
But then you have 3D Magic Mike who's creating bezels, deciding fonts,
Yeah.
printing out in carbon and then metal and then forming an entire shape of carbon to make a stack, to make an intake manifold, to make a flare.
So
It's crazy.
to add on to that, you know how I was saying that like you need to be able to see the end result and then build towards it? There's no better way in my mind to see the end result
Than to literally see it.
Literally 3D scan the entire
Yes.
car, 3D scan all the components that you're going to make or put on the car.
Or draw them in the program.
Right, or physically make them.
Yes.
to-
3D
to
print
then
them.
be made later.
Yes.
And be able to physically install them on the car.
And decide that
and
is
then
not what I
decide,
like.
It's not what I want. I want something that looks a little different, or this needs to flow and meet this. Because if you were building it, let's call it the hard way or the old way,
Yeah.
you would be like, well, I'm going to have to settle because that didn't really work the way I was envisioning. And it's happened to me.
Or you'd have to scrap it.
It happens to me every single car.
Yes.
And then, or you scrap it and you waste a bunch of money. I mean, there's a lot of parts like on my old Orange Integra
Yeah.
that I was literally like, well, that didn't quite work, so just put that on the shelf and use it hopefully someday or
Yes.
throw it away,
Yes.
right? I can think of my front traction bar thing I made. That just didn't work out.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
spent tons of money creating this like fabricated, a lot of time, Dana spent on it and whatever. It just didn't
It
work.
just didn't work.
It just got trashed.
Yeah.
Okay, if the car was 3D scanned and something was created, you go, oh, that's not going to work. Either make the adjustment
Yeah.
or just
Okay.
select all delete, and it doesn't work.
So what Ryan is talking about is the ultimate, right? Because before people use their imagination, they sketched it or they maybe rendered it, but like 2D. Okay.
Yeah, and then you got these people like Foos that are hand
Drawing
things.
stuff.
Okay, that's cool.
Okay, but then you
think
have
about
this, right? So
whole nother level.
So it is, you can turn the chassis, you can draw the part, you can attach the part, so you're literally looking at it in a vectorized, completely rotate, you can rotate it all, and then you can print these flares you designed, these ITB stacks that you designed. You can print it, install it physically, and then say, no, I want them to swoop up a little bit more. I want this flare to flare out a little bit more. I want it to have a curve. I want it to have an edge.
All it would cost you is time and plastic.
And plastic,
right? And then
right?
if you prove your concept,
Yeah.
and then you can implement a metal version or a carbon version or leave it a plastic version.
Okay, and what we're touching on is there are going to be a certain amount of people who have access to that type of machinery, who have the knowledge base. I get that. We are using an example of how far things are going, and that's not the future. Magic Mike's car and the gentleman that he mentioned, they're currently being done, and it isn't just like, oh, I just need to wait till I have, I learned this program. These guys have learned them, and they've been knowing, and they're making the stuff. But with Mike's Datsun, for example, the placement of the turbo setup, the bed, the custom bed design, that he's designed the entirety of the vehicle together.
So
And
even if he uses his factory bed, for example,
yes,
or he makes his own
bed.
3D bed,
Yeah.
but if he uses his OG original bed,
Yes.
and he's 3D scanned the whole thing, and his turbo is, let's say, sticking out of the bed, and his cantilever suspension sticking out of the
Yeah.
bed. You literally can use that and just cut, or you can have a machine
Because the
laser-
measurements are to
because
spec.
it's to spec.
It's the spec
So
because
you
it's
could,
been scanned.
in theory, you could jig that bed, and then you could laser cut out that section
Yeah.
without just cutting and trying to make it work. So I mean, there's so many things that are
But I think the point here that I want to make sure you guys catch is it doesn't have to be that to be memorable.
sure.
But yet we've talked about everything from billet pieces to all-wheel drive to very simple JDM parts all the way to now 3D scanned Inconel 3D metal printed car. Okay, the point is these all kind of end up fitting into this realm of amazing builds, not because one has had more time and money put into it. Because there's a lot of guys who have a lot of time and money put into their cars, and they just don't. They don't stand out. They don't. They don't. They don't. They don't.
They don't hold the test of time.
They don't hold the test of time. And you guys, that is as simple as patience, execution, and details. That's really what it is. And you have to have, study, whether that be magazines, now, social media, Googling, whatever you want, and just right clicking and saving 1 billion photos, going to events, whatever you need to do. But you take that inspiration, you decide what you want to build, and you just because a part's hard to find, or it's rare, it's expensive, who cares? You build what you want, and as long as you're happy, that's good. But will it stand the test of time? There aren't very many well done cars that have patience, execution, and details that people forget about, and that's saying something. Do you agree with that, Ryan?
Yeah. I could go with that.
What cars do you guys think? Old, kind of old, present day, future? What do you guys think? Whose builds do you guys want us to know about if we didn't mention them? Which ones stood out to you? Let us know in the comments. And we appreciate you guys, and we'll see you on the next episode of Car Talk.